Fresh and
All right, welcome back to another episode of Fresh and Buds. I am your host, Tommy Fresh, and you are all of my buds, and we have a very special bud on this week on episode 56. It is, you know him, Michael Hamilton. How you doing, Michael?
Hey, Tommy, I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here, man. We'll talk a little bit about how we met, but this has been a long time coming, and I'm glad to get someone of your obvious playing caliber, but also just cool vibes and good personality on here as well. So this is going to be a lot of fun. But before we get into it, I do want to mention the Patreon, which will be in the show notes in the link tree. Which it just helps keep the lights on and the mics hot. All of it is appreciated and never required. But if that's something you all are into, I would like for you guys to check it out. But it's just a thing. So you check it out if you like. And I also want to remind folks again that we do have the Realm Games Fall Brawl coming up in October. It's a 10K in Columbus, Ohio. I was given a speakeasy ticket for the speakeasy party after day one. And in order to win that, you got to design a podcast hero. And all that information is pinned on my Twitter at FreshBudsPod. And there is also a channel for it in the Buds Discord. If anyone would like to join that is free to join as well, and in the show notes. But let's get to Michael. How you doing, my friend? This is Labor Day that we are recording. We are a week separated from the Pro Tour. I mean, as many people know, you are a two-time calling champ and now a Battle Hardened Champ in Lille with Limited, which, you're very well known for your constructed play, but you came out there firing with the Limited, right?
Yeah, I am more known for constructed, but I feel like I'm more drawn to Limited. Back when I guess I'll kind of go into this more later, but the way I was learning the game with Roger, we were just jamming Tales of Aria Sealed over and over again. So I really like Limited.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're speaking to my heart with Limited. It's my favorite way to play the game. And, as far as Uprising goes, I think it's been I enjoy it. Maybe not as much as Tales, but, I'm excited to see them kind of explore that. But before we get into some flesh and blood, I want the Buds to get to know you. I want to get to know you. I want to know, where did your trading card game journey start?
Depends how far back you want to go. When I was like 5 or 6, I was really into Pokemon cards, and then that eventually turned into Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and I played those a little bit in like middle school. And then I kind of stopped playing card games for a while. I got really into Smash Brothers and just played. I went to some Smash Bros tournaments and had a good time doing that. But eventually, one of my online buddies recommended Magic to me, and he kind of taught me how to play. He gave me this mono red deck and beat me up with some vampires. And I was like, okay, well, I get how the game's working. And then he's like, the real reason I like this game is because of draft. And he took me to a draft. It was an online draft, but he got me into an online draft, and I drafted and I battled, and I got beat up real bad. I'm like, this is so cool. You're like figuring out your deck during the draft, and then you build something from the cards you pick. And I basically got hooked pretty quickly and started drafting all the time. Eventually I signed up for Magic Online and started drafting a bunch on there, spending a reasonable amount of money doing it because it's not very cheap to draft on Magic Online. But
no, not at all. Believe me, I know.
I slowly got better to the point where I was telling myself I was breaking even in the drafts, which I don't know if that was ever true, but I started telling myself that. And then I subsidized it a little bit by playing constructed with budget constructed decks. And I did that for actually several years, where I was just like learning all the new draft formats and playing a lot of drafts on there. And I basically never stopped playing card games after that. I've had like some periods where I've played a little bit less, but yeah, I just really like card games.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of those classic Magic Limited sets are more than enough to get you hooked to Limited and card games in general. One thing I wanted to go back on, you mentioned that you're a big Smash Bros fan and you play a lot of Smash Bros. I too love Smash Bros. I mean, still to this day, my one group of friends, whenever we hang out, it's all right. Well, we're smashing, and it is interesting to me to hear, you know, someone like you who's, you know, highly competitive in card games, that, you know, there is some parallels. At least I find that there's some parallels between Smash Bros. And being competitive in general. Do you find that to be true?
I think so. Yeah, because like even like when you're playing Smash Bros. Pretty casually, everyone's like trying to win and stuff and wanting to win, and it's I don't know. I feel like it's just like maybe just fighting games in general where you're like hitting each other and trying to knock each other out and win. I guess it just leads to being something competitive people like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been to some of those Smash Bros. Tournaments. They're, I would say, more intense than some of the Flesh and Blood and Magic tournaments I've been to, which is a lot of fun. But, you know, there's the parallels there, at least that you mentioned, like the hitting each other and smashing each other. I mean, even in every card name in Flesh and Blood, it is basically a Smash Bros. Move in one way or another. But
sure.
Now, you were drafting a lot in Magic. Were you how competitive did you get in Magic before like moving into Flesh and Blood?
So by the end of my Magic career, I guess I'll call it, before I really transitioned to Flesh and Blood, I was pretty competitive. I had gone to 2 Pro Tours and played at a lot of the Star City Games Opens and Invitationals. I think my biggest claim to fame was I won it's not a calling, it's an open in a Star City Games Open. It was like a standard format, and I had a sweet 4-color control deck.
Of course.
And then I've done pretty well at the invitational circuit as well. So,
well, I mean, so obviously talented Magic player, but you know, then Flesh and Blood came into the picture. When did that happen?
So it was after Monarch's release, reasonably after Monarch, but before the Tales of Aria pre-release. My buddy Roger messages me. He's like, "Hey, you know how Magic's dead? Not dead, but like there wasn't really like any competitive Magic. It was like during COVID." And he links me to this article announcing the $1 million organized play thing for Flesh and Blood for 2022. And I'm like, that's so cool. If this game is good, then this sounds awesome. And he's like, well, there happens to be a limited calling, which is, he kind of told me it was like a grand prix, like in Cincinnati, which is, that was coming up, and it was like, Cincinnati's like a 2-hour drive for me. And I'm like, this is awesome. Let's check out this game. And he bought some Blitz starter decks and brought them over to my house. And we played Levia versus Prism as our first games of Flesh and Blood. And I thought the game was horrible. I'm like, this game is so bad, because he was playing Prism and he just played attack. And I'm like, well, all of my attacks just have 6 power and your attacks don't work anymore. And I was ready to get rid of the game, just give up on it at that point. But then we played Chain versus Bolton. Thankfully, he bought all 4 of the Monarch starter decks. So he played Chain versus Bolton. And I was like, okay, I can see what's happening here. And I'm like, Chain seems broken, but I see what's happening here. I get the game.
You know, I got to say, I mean, you're kind of explaining a lot of my first experience with the game with the Monarch decks. I mean, that's when my hatred for Prism started. Not even because it was oppressive, but because I was like, well, just if anybody runs 6 attacks, I was like, this deck's the worst. And then, obviously, it's not as simple as that. But at the time when you first start playing, you're like, why did they print it like this? Why that like one deck would just like destroy another out of these starter decks? But you know, it's neither here nor there. But Chain was certainly broken. So you get a feel for the game, and you went to the Cincinnati Calling.
Yeah, well, I guess like after we get a feel for the game, we started doing Welcome to Wraith sealed games, and then eventually Aria came out, and we did some Aria sealed to practice for the Calling, and then we went to the Calling. But the planning to go to the Calling was kind of always there from when we started playing.
Yeah, and how did you do in the Calling, in your first Calling?
I got top 4, and then I lost to Tarek Patel.
Well, you know, Tarek is certainly good as well. I mean, that's like 2 titans, you know, in as far as I could tell. I mean, that is so like, all right, yeah. So Flesh and Blood has entered the arena for you here, right? You pick up the game, you jam some games with the Blitz deck, you do some practice with Sealed, and then you go to your first Calling and you top 4. losing to the soon-to-be U.S. national champ. That is pretty incredible, right? Much like, even to parallel you to Tarek, that's a very quick rise to the top echelons of competitive play. Was there something in that like short amount of time before the calling that clicked in you? You're like, oh, I can do something really good with this game. Like I can compete at the highest level. Or was the calling in Cincinnati the confirmation of that?
Cincinnati was really the confirmation of that. Before then, I had mostly just played against Roger. We played, like I said, a ton of Aria Sealed. We played some of the other formats like Welcome to Wraith. But like mostly leading up to that tournament, I had basically almost only played with Roger. We went to a couple local drafts, but not a lot outside of that testing. So going to the calling and then doing really well at the calling, that was when I was like really hooked. And that was when I was like, okay, maybe I can compete with some of the best. Because even at the calling, they had us fill out these like top 8 like player profile things. And we had to kind of talk about what this meant to us and why we were there. And I was like, this is really cool. I get to play with some of the best people in the world playing this new game that I'm still learning and I'm really enjoying. And I get to play against some of the best people. And that's what it meant to me. I didn't really know what it would lead to or anything. But
well, it is really incredible. And obviously, it's great to hear like someone as talented as you be so humble about it and kind of just like be excited to be in the arena with those, great players, because that is really exciting. And I think, we play this game because it's fun and we want to play with the best. And that's great to hear. Now, you keep mentioning Roger. I do want to shout out Roger. He has a podcast with you. Do you want to talk a little bit about the podcast?
Yeah, so it's called the Manor Podcast, and it's me and my buddy Roger. We started playing Flesh and Blood together. We met in the Magic days at a tournament, actually. And we basically just like talk about Flesh and Blood strategy and basically what we think the meta will look like and what we're doing in the meta game with the different heroes. And its purpose is to help people get better at the game. So if that's something you're interested in, check us out.
It'll all be in the show notes, but it is incredible. I've listened to it, and you guys obviously are putting out some great like informational content. But I do love in the most recent episode, I think Roger just asked you what the meaning of life was. Just to open up the podcast. I was like, okay, I'm in. Like this is the deep stuff I'm looking for.
I wasn't ready for that question. He just kind of threw it at me out of nowhere. I was like, okay, I guess I'll talk about it. I don't know.
I mean, I love it. Yeah. I mean, everybody, please check out that podcast. It is incredible. But I do want to talk a little bit about how we met in Vegas at the Uprising premiere, I guess it was called. This was during I guess it was a Battle Hardened, right? That was like that Sunday. And we got paired up. You were on Chain and I was on Levia, of course. And I think, probably outside the Blitz decks, you probably hadn't seen much Levia because you were reading a lot of my cards. I do remember that. You were, which was pretty funny to me. I was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, let's see if I can get him a little bit. And we had this great game where it came down to you had your husk in your banish zone, and I was trying to bait out the reckless swing for the win, and you totally read it, and like I was like, oh man, he big brained me, and I ended up losing, but it was a great game. And one thing I wanted to kind of touch on was one thing I noticed when we were playing was, I knew you were a 2-time calling champ and this great player, and just an absolute fun to play against. But you were also like super nice and such a good sport. It's something that I think sometimes can be lacking in competitive card games, which like it's not a requirement to be nice and be a good sport and have like good gamesmanship. But I think it definitely enhances the experience, especially like we are here to play in the flesh and blood. And, here at the podcast, we have something called Big Bud's Energy, right? And you seem to exude it. And I just wanted to ask you, how important to you is it to like be a good person, have good gamemanship when sitting across the table from opponents like from all over the world, from all different walks of life?
So I think it's pretty important because like ultimately, no matter how competitive you are, no matter how much you want to win, you're here playing a game you love against people that love the same game as you. And like your goal should be to do as well as you can, yes, but also like if you're not having fun, then what are you doing? Why are you here? And if you're making other people not have fun, then like you're just like detracting from their experience as well. So to me, it seems pretty important that you're like at least trying to be pleasant to be around. And I think it's also like important to understand that everyone's human and people are going to have their bad moments where they're frustrated or things didn't go the way they hoped, and try to be like understanding of that. But at the same time, like you're mostly responsible for yourself and just like trying to be a pleasant opponent for your opponents.
And it is something like I would love for people to kind of like take stock of and kind of learn from. You know, it's great because, you know, you're an accomplished player and you're so highly competitive. And I'm sure we all get those moments when we're like a little bit tilted, or you're just like, God, like the all red hand, and like you're just like, what am I, you know? But you know, it's good to see that you're just happy to be there, and I think that's a good way to be, because like, right, we're playing card games in 2022, and it's awesome. But yeah, no, I'm glad that that you feel that way. But we do have a quick listener question for you before we get into the fresh faves. Sigma in the Discord does ask, because you know you're known for your play with Oldham and, you know, just control in general. Do you sometimes stop yourself from doing an optimal play on some certain turns just to pitch stack a later play? And I guess he just wanted to know a little bit about your pitch stacking theories in general.
So for pitch stacking, I think in general, I won't sacrifice a lot to do a play first cycle, or set up a play for second cycle. I think you want to maximize the value of every hand as well as you can. But there's a lot of stuff you can do to improve your second cycle without giving up any value in the first cycle. Like you can choose to block with like if you have two blue block threes and one's like a Terrace Under and one's like a Winner's Grasp or something, you definitely want to block with a Winner's Grasp and pitch stack the Terrace Under for the second cycle. And then there's a lot of room where you can like remember what you've put on the bottom of your deck and just try to make a conscious effort to remember the cards that you pitched last turn and the cards that you pitched this turn. And then you can try to like set it up so that, let's say I pitched, what's a good example? Let's say I pitched Arouse the Ancients last turn. Then I really want to make sure I follow it up by pitching my blues with high power and try to have them next to it if possible. So with Oldhim specifically, there's a lot of flexibility to do this because you have Crown of Seeds. So you can try to set it up so you pitch a Cranial Crush and Arsenal a blue ice card or something that doesn't work with Rouse the Ancients, rather than pitching the blue ice card and arsenaling the Cranial Crush to Crown Away later. Just really being aware of what you pitched the previous turn goes a long way to making your second cycle look a lot more functional, even if you don't set up like super elaborate pitch decks or anything.
Is there any way that you personally practice that, or is that just something that you just have to like just playing a deck and understanding and being pitching with intent and going forward?
I think Starvo kind of trained me really well to do this, where like when I was pitching a lightning card or an ice card or an earth card, I'd really need to remember that to make sure I pitched the other elements next when I had basically control over what elements I pitched. So Starvo really kind of trained me to just remember the last couple of turns pitches to try to set up those rainbows on the second cycle. And I think that you can kind of learn that skill by just like practicing and trying to remember it and just playing any slower deck and then remembering what you pitched the previous turn. And eventually, if you start remembering those things, then when they come up again in the second cycle, you're like, oh yeah, I pitched these cards together. And then it kind of clicks in your mind. You get rewarded. You're like, yes, this is how I set it up. And it all came together. And then you just keep doing that and you'll get better and better at it. Yeah.
I mean, it is one of the toughest things in this game to kind of like really grasp, I think, for especially newer players and even some experienced players in general. One thing that I do sometimes just to practice, like if I'm just messing around with like a physical deck, like here on my desk, sometimes I'll pitch and I will put it on the bottom face up and then just like draw through and goldfish and then until I hit that second cycle and just take a look at, how that pitch stack looked. and be like, well, does this look good or does this look bad? And then kind of like, that's something that's worked for me, but obviously, playing a lot of control like Oldhim and Starvo will do that as well. But yeah, no, thank you for answering that. Thank you for the question, Sigma. I do want to get to the fresh faves, which is a little segment where I ask my guest a couple of their favorite things. Are you ready?
I guess I'm ready. Let's go.
Yeah, we're doing it. First off, who is your favorite hero?
It has to be Oldhim. I loved Oldhim in Aria Limited, and I loved Oldhim in Classic Constructed. He's my first calling win, and he's got to be my favorite hero.
I mean, just such an awesome, even from like flavor wise, like one of the cool, like when I saw his art get spoiled for Aria, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to try to play this guy. He's so cool. What is your favorite weapon?
It's gotta be Winter's Wail too. It's just got that special place in my heart. It's both my calling wins. I only had Winter's Wail.
I can't blame you. I mean, it's like if you're winning with that card, it's like, and then this is one of the cooler cards in the game anyway. So not a bad answer at all. What is your favorite equipment?
I think this one's actually Final Spring Tunic. I didn't play Tunic at the first calling that I won. And immediately after the tournament, I was like, what if we slotted Tunic into this deck? Can we make that happen? Because I was still on Tectonic Plating. Basically, I really like how much play there is around Tunic, where you can cash in the resource earlier for like smaller value, or you can try to hold on to it to maybe like get a full Rosetta Sword swing or something.
Mm-hmm.
It also really rewards you for drawing out the game, which is something I already like to do anyway. So I really like Tunic a lot.
Yeah, I was going to guess Crown of Seeds, but I'm sure that was up there on the list as well. But Tunic's awesome. And what, finally, is your favorite non-hero, non-weapon, non-equipment card? The run-of-mill cards, instants, attack actions.
I think it's just Sink Below, because it's just exactly what I want to be doing. It's efficient. It's a 0 for 4. It doesn't use an action point. It stops your opponent's on hits when you need to. It also fixes red heavy hands, so you can use your Sink Below. If you draw too many reds, you can just sink and fix, or at least have a chance at fixing your hands. So I really like how powerful it is and how much it does to like smooth out your game plan. And in a world without Crown of Seeds, you also have Sink Below to kind of tuck your important cards that you want to leave in the second cycle with that card. It's just really powerful, and it's a really cool effect.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the defense reaction, right? When you think of like a defense reaction, I mean, most people are going to just like, yeah, Sink Below. I think of Reckless Swing, but it's just like I just want to kill people on their turn. Sorry. But yeah, no, this is the fresh phase. All excellent cards and excellent choices as always. But I do want to get to our main topic, Michael. We are just gotten out of Pro Tour Lille weekend, and in that weekend, Prism hit Living Legend. Before we get into what happened in Columbus this weekend, how did you feel about Prism in the meta?
I am very glad she is God. She beat up my Guardian decks really badly, and I have lost many games to Prism. Good riddance.
Yeah, good riddance is right. I am in the same boat as you, but this past weekend was the first like larger tournament we've had since Prism hit Living Legend, was retired officially. And SCG Con in Columbus had a Battle Hardened and then also like a Road to Nets qualifier. It was a little bit smaller, but so we're just going to look at the Battle Hardened numbers here. But the meta was as follows: 16% Briar, 15% Oldhim, 11% Dromai, and same with Viserai. Both Fi and Icelander both had 9% of the share. Bravo had 8, and Dash had 6, and then the other 15% was your odds and ends, your Dories, your Levias, your Kanos, your Reinars. Does this meta surprise you at all? Or was this kind of what we'd expect post Pro Tour Lille, with Briar winning the Pro Tour, Prism hitting LL?
I think the meta is pretty much what I would expect. Maybe there's a little bit more Dromai than I would have thought, because I think Dromai is like pretty complicated and hasn't really put up a lot of results since she came out, but it kind of makes sense that some of the illusionist players would turn to Dromai now that Prism's gone, and they're like, she's the next illusionist. And Dromai does do some very powerful things as well, so it's definitely makes sense that she was pretty popular. And I think another thing that is noteworthy is there was less of a concentration on one deck, but I think that's just kind of the nature of Battle Hardens compared to like Pro Tours. Whereas Battle Hardened, yes, everyone's trying to win, and yes, everyone's playing their best and playing heroes they think are good. But if you love Dromai and you think Briar's a tiny bit better than Dromai, but you like playing Dromai way more, then I think at a Battle Hardened, you're a lot more likely to register Dromai than you are to register Briar, even if you think Briar is slightly better.
Sure. That makes sense. This is an interesting meta for sure. We're seeing a lot more control, right? And you won your first calling with Oldhim, and then you won your second calling with Control Starvo during the Starvo reign of power, the evil Starvo. But the cool thing about Starvo, or at least Control Starvo, was like it wasn't just trying to high roll. It was playing out almost like an Oldhim deck with Crippling Crush that can be dominated with Go Again, and it was very cool. So as someone who got put on the map with these control-y decks, how does this meta look to you? Are you like, we mentioned that you're a little excited about it. Is this something that you're like, oh, like you cannot wait for the next tournament?
Well, I don't feel ready for the next tournament. Like, I think I need to do some more groundwork before nationals. I want to explore some more heroes, but I am really excited for this metagame. I'm really ready to be competing in what is potentially the slowest format I've ever gotten to play in, because there's always been like an aggro deck on top, or even the Starvo decks that were doing really well. They were usually like slightly aggressively slanted during a lot of Starvo's era. So like, this has potential to be one of the slowest formats I guess I've seen. And that's really exciting to me, because the longer the game is, the more decision points you have, the more opportunities there is to basically influence the game's outcome. And there are more chances there are for both you and your opponent to mess up. So it should be, I think these slower matchups are usually extremely skill testing, and that's something I really like too.
Yeah. And, not only just like longer games give your opponents and yourself more chances to mess up, but it also gives you and your opponent more chances to outplay each other, which is like super cool, right? Because sometimes in those like super fast metas, like you're just like hitting and like not blocking, and it's like it's almost like as if every card has zero block, and until like the last turn of the game when someone's trying to live. It's good. It's cool to see, in my opinion, to see kind of Flesh and Blood slow down like this, and Prism leaving, and I know a lot of folks might not agree. I think it was a really good thing, even if it means a more controlled decks running around. But so you're looking at this meta, right? What would you have thought the top 8 would look like after you saw this breakdown? Let's say you were playing round 1 and someone said, oh, here's the breakdown of these heroes. What would you have thought the top 8 would look like?
So I would take the top 8 that we got and just remove 3 heroes from it, any 3 heroes of your choice, and replace them with Rune Blades, and that would be about what I would expect.
Yeah. So probably like I was actually most surprised to see 2 Dromais in the top 8. For whatever reason, a dash will always just sneak in there, right? And it's
Yeah.
like sometimes the dash is just like running hot, and the dash is like just that kind of deck. Icelander was interesting to me to see 2 of, but not unexpected. And then obviously we both knew Oldhim was going to be hanging out there in the top 8. Now, your buddy Ryan Rich on Oldhim beat Matt Dilks on Dash in the finals. I want to give a shout out to your friend, Ryan.
Yeah. So Ryan Rich is a local-ish. I think he's from the Ohio area, but he's came over to my house once in preparation for the Pro Tour and did some drafts with us. And yeah, I've ran into him a lot at like the Pro Quest seasons and the Road to Nationals and stuff. And he actually took me down in the Oldhim Mirror at the Pro Tour. So then he went on to win this Battle Hardened shortly after. So that's great stuff from Ryan.
Yeah, well, he's playing great. And how do you feel about actually that Dash matchup for Oldhim?
I think it's fine. So it's definitely not like one of Oldheim's best matchups, but it's definitely winnable, especially if you're on a more aggressive version of Oldheim, where you can put a lot of pressure on the dash before she really gets all of her items set up. And then once she does have all of her items set up, Rampart mitigates a reasonable amount of the damage. And then you can do things like Blizzard and Channel Lake Frigid to also get rid of a lot of her damage. So it's not like the matchup that I would be like, all right, there's going to be dash everywhere, I'm going to bring Oldheim to the tournament. But I don't think it's like nearly as bad as a lot of people make it out to be.
Yeah. And I know that after the Calling Singapore, when Dash, had that crazy run right before Lille, people were like, oh, is this Dash's time? And I don't think it quite is, but it's still, a potent deck. Now, so looking at this Battle Hardened after Lille, were there any big surprises for you here? Do you think that you would have thought something might have been a little bit more represented, or was this par for the course?
I think this was about par for the course. I think maybe something that would have surprised other people is how much more Oldheim there was than Bravo, but I've always thought that makes sense that there's more Oldheim. I've been actually surprised how close it's been at a lot of other events, because I think outside of Crippling Crush, I don't think there's a lot of advantages to playing Bravo instead of Oldheim. So I've always thought it's surprising that their numbers were similar. So this had almost twice as much Oldheim as Bravo, and that's about where I would expect it to be. Yeah,
it's interesting. Now, you play a lot of Guardian. Is Bravo something you ever considered, or are you pretty much set on, hey, it's like Oldham's the way to go?
I think Oldham's just the way to go. I think between Winter's Will, Stalagmite, getting to play Tunic pretty effectively, and Oldheim's defense reaction, I think, is also very powerful. I think something weird would have to happen for me to register Bravo over Oldheim in any tournament.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a reason to run Bravo. Maybe if everybody's packing Thaws in their Draconic decks, but I don't even think that's something something to be worried about. But now we are a couple weeks away from Nationals, which is very exciting. It's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. Split format, but CC is the main event here, right? It's what everybody's going to be looking to. Is this a good indicator? Is Columbus a good indicator of what we can expect in only a few short weeks in Charlotte? Or do you think that there's still a lot to be figured out?
I would expect Nationals to be pretty similar in that distribution, maybe a little bit more heavily towards the most played heroes and a little less towards some of the other, and like maybe less Bravo or Dash or Icelander and stuff. But I think overall, you shouldn't be surprised to play against any of the decks that really showed up at the Battle Hardened. I wouldn't read too much into the top 8. The Battle Hardened is it's not single elimination, but like if you lose round 1 or round 2, I think you were dead to top 8, and you can maybe lose in one of the later rounds, but you have to go undefeated in the first few rounds and maybe get one loss later in the tournament to top 8 those. So I wouldn't wade too much into the top 8 of that tournament and look more at the metagame overall and expect to potentially play against all those decks.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? You look at, I believe even a friend of the show, Ethan Van Sant, got 9th at the Battle Hardened with Phi. That would have been one of the aggro decks that would have made it in, but he had the early loss. And it is a shame these Battle Hardens are kind of capped at 6 rounds instead of the 7 rounds it probably should have been. And it's tough. It's the daggers against players, and it's not the greatest representation of kind of what we can expect performing well. I guess probably more of a top 16 is something we should look at a little bit closer. Now, do you find that this meta is healthy? I mean, I know that there's some bias here, right? Obviously, you're like chomping at the bit to get out there and start, hitting people Winter's Whale. But if you could step aside from that, would you say this is a healthy meta? Because there are some naysayers out there.
I think realistically, we've had this format for about a week since Prism got Living Legend out. So I think it's probably too early to say if it's healthy or not. If it's not healthy, then that'll show to be the case over the national season, where maybe the top 8s are all dominated by Oldheim, or maybe there's no aggro decks doing well anywhere or something like that. But for now, I expect it to be pretty healthy. I think that Oldheim, Dromai, Icelander all being in good shape and being slower decks. And both Icelander and Oldheim used to have basically an unwinnable matchup into Prism, and that being gone and replaced with Dromai, which can be tough for either of them, but it's not necessarily unwinnable. You can like reasonably take steps to beat them.
Mm-hmm.
And then assuming that aggro isn't completely dead, then I think this metagame is pretty healthy. But if we keep seeing top 8s like this where there's no aggro decks anywhere, despite aggro being 30+% of the field, then I'll be worried. But for now, I expect it to be a pretty healthy format.
Yeah, and I imagine that even just what we just said about this not being a complete representation, the top 8 not being a complete representation, we know we had Fives right there. We know we had Briars right there. And I imagine that aggro is not dead. Like Briar is still so annoying and strong, and Fi is like absolutely like can just win like almost any matchup. I feel like if it's played well and has those like high roll turns. So I am excited to see where this meta takes us. And this is a meta that's been delivered to us by Prism Living Legending, or hitting Living Legend, which, it's the third hero to be hit Living Legend now. Starvo was a very fast journey, quick and fast journey to Living Legend. Chain, a little bit longer, and Prism, obviously, well over a year, probably about a year and a half, being legal. The conversation has been, is this how we want Living Legend to be? This kind of like, I think what the final number of days Prism was legal was like 480 or something like that. Is this where you would want Living Legend to be, or do you think it needs to be faster or longer?
I think this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but I think it's still a little bit too early to tell, because what I'm really curious about are those heroes that like aren't putting up consistent results, but have always been occasionally doing well, like Lexis and Oldheims that have had their times where they've been like good choices, but they're not necessarily like ever slam dunks or dominating the metagame. Katsu is also another one that kind of comes up a lot, that he had a lot of time where he was good, and for a lot of the time he's been like not the worst choice, but not the best choice. And now I guess he's kind of falling off now that Fi is here. Maybe Bravo's a good example of that. But again, I think Bravo is also bad because Oldheim I think is mostly better. But these heroes that like have seen some results but haven't been like dominating the metagame, I want to know how long they're going to be around for before I say anything.
No, yeah, for sure.
I think Starvo was too fast, because Starvo was reasonably
like
less than a year, right? Like half a year,
couple months, 3 months, 4 months. Yeah, it was pretty wild. It definitely did not hit 6 months, because Everfest was February and the Pro Tour was May. Pretty crazy.
I think that was too fast, and I wouldn't like to see any heroes go out in 3 or 4 months. But if a hero is putting up results like Chain or Prism, where they're like a very solid force in the metagame, and they've never had a metagame where they're like just like bad choices and they're putting up results the whole time, I think like a year and a half, that seems like a pretty reasonable span for what is one of the top heroes of the game.
Sure. And we do have, I guess like all eyes were on the calling in Lille, right? So Briar obviously won the Pro Tour, so got a ton of points from the Pro Tour, and then if it had won the calling, it would have been at like 40 points shy and would have anything but guaranteed hitting Living Legend in that season. It has a little bit of a climb, but there are a lot of points to gain in that season. However, one of the things that led Briar to be that strong was Prism being in the meta, obviously. I think it's safe to say that there's a good chance that Briar will hit Living Legend by the time Worlds comes around. If Briar's playable enough, and I still think Briar is. That set aside, if you had to guess, Michael, which hero will hit Living Legend next outside of Briar? Because it's most likely Briar.
Yeah, Briar was definitely the safe answer there.
Leviah?
No. I think there's a few we can rule out, and I think Leviah and Azalea are almost definitely not the answer.
Probably Bolton as well. I mean, Oldham is very like set up to gain a lot of points this Nats season if he continues to play like he's playing this past weekend.
Yeah, I think Oldham has a pretty good shot at being the next one after Breyer. I could also see it being one of the 3 uprising heroes. I think all 3 of them are reasonably strong, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's a build of Icelander or Dromai or even Phi that really hasn't been fleshed out yet and ends up taking the meta by storm once. I mean, maybe even after Breyer's gone, if maybe they're struggling into Breyer, but even now. And then I guess the last hero that I think has a shot is Viserai, because I think Viserai is doing pretty reasonable on Living Legend points right now, and he would need to get a lot of these points before Rosetta Thorn leaves, because I think he's going to struggle once Rosetta Thorn leaves. But
yes,
if he gets a big chunk before Rosetta Thorn, I could see Viserai being the next one too.
Yeah, that's actually something that, you know, I hadn't thought about, right? Breyer is carrying that Rosetta Thorn with her to Living Legend status, and those rune blades start to look not so great after that. Though they had some okay, I guess, options. I'm actually blanking on the Viserai weapon from Arcane Rising. It used to be played in Chain, the OG Chain during the first Road to Nats season. I don't have any arc in front of me, but you know, that's very interesting because Viserai definitely takes a huge hit if he can't play Rosetta Thorn. But I guess that's an interesting thing in general. It's hard to say what other heroes that would really damage other heroes by hitting Living Legends, right? Oldham hits, it's Winter's Wail, which is, you know, not played in anything else right now. It would have been played in Starro, but and the same with Lexi. Nothing cares about Voltaire, but Lexi's one that I was actually pretty interested, going back to the Columbus, that I didn't see put up any crazy results that we can see. I did want to ask you about Lexi. How do you feel about Lexi getting into this meta?
I haven't really worked on Lexi a lot recently. I worked on her a lot leading into the first Pro Tour, and I thought she was actually if Starvo had gotten banned, I would have been reasonably likely to register Lexi for that tournament. But I think Yuki Lee Bender said something. I don't remember where she said it, but she's kind of the Lexi expert, and I value her opinion on Lexi a lot. She said that the metagame is really open, and Lexi does best when there's something specific for her to target, or a few things specific for her to target, because Lexi's not really like there on raw power against the field. She's not really able to race a lot of the rune blades, especially when they have Command and Conquer to randomly just mess her up. And then if she runs into other decks that she's not prepared for because she's spending a lot of her slots on rune blades or Prism or whatever, then it can be really tough for her. So I think a lot of Lexi's weakness is just how open this current format is. And I think that if it gets confined down to being like 2 or 3 heroes and with clear targets on their head, and most people are playing one of those 3 heroes, I think you could probably find a Lexi build that's like in a good spot in 2 or maybe all 3 of those matchups. But with the format being so open, it is quite hard to pinpoint exactly what to target.
Yeah. I could see that big time for Lexi. Yeah, but I was interested because it's one of those decks that always seems to take at least me by surprise, or sometimes a tournament by surprise. So you know, I guess we'll see if there's anything for Lexi to target when it comes around to Nat season. Now, I did want to ask you before we, you know, say our goodbyes and go on, and you know, I play Levi and you keep playing Guardian. How was your experience in France?
It was good. I loved the tournament. I loved playing against a ton of different people. Overall, France as a whole, I was actually not a huge fan of. I'm not, in general, a big traveling person, but the tournament was a great experience. All 3 days, the 2 days of the Pro Tour I got to play, and then the Battle Hardened on the 3rd day. Almost all my opponents were great to play against, and the tournaments were really well ran. I didn't feel like we were waiting overly long for pairings or anything after the matches. And all the judge calls that I was a part of and saw happening seemed like they went pretty smoothly. And I guess how I would I don't want to say how I would expect them to go, but like I felt like there weren't like a lot of sorry.
Sorry. For the folks at home, I'm Michael's cat just came up and said hi, which everybody please say hi to Michael. What's your cat's name?
Her name's Misty.
Misty. Everybody say hi to Misty. She's adorable.
But I think that the tournament was ran really well, and the judges did a great job, and I was just overall really happy with how the tournament was ran and things go, and how the players were there too, I guess.
Yeah, which is it seemed like an awesome weekend, right? Because I'm from New Jersey, right? So I was especially ecstatic that Pro Tour 1 was in New Jersey. And I think everybody was having a great time. The energy in that room was amazing, and everybody was super stoked that we were having a Pro Tour for Flesh and Blood, and like it was awesome. And I'm glad that the Europeans got to experience that as well. Did you feel a similar energy in Lille?
I think I remember the banquet at New Jersey. I was shocked and blown away, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, and everything was happening. And like, I think in Lille there was a lot of that same energy where everyone's like, this is really cool. And I don't know, I'm really excited and really happy to be part of the Flesh and Blood Pro scene, and I think it is a really cool that it is happening the way it is. And I feel like a lot of other people would echo that sentiment where they're just like, this is great. This is cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that LSS is doing something right. Right. It's, you can say, they are not without their flaws for sure. And like any studio or company that is making a game, it's very hard. Game design is not easy, and I think a lot of people forget that sometimes. But and also running a company that sells packaged goods or packaged like product is a very tough thing to do, especially in today's day and age. But it's good to hear that like the banquet in Jersey was awesome. It sounded like the banquet in Lille was awesome again. It's awesome. I'm very excited to see where the Pro Tours kind of evolve into with LSS and what they're doing. Now, you said you aren't a big travel person. Do you have a dream Pro Tour city? Cincinnati?
Indianapolis is the real answer. Yeah, right. A local Pro Tour would be the best for me, but as far as traveling places, I know James White said it'd probably never happen, but my wife really wants to go to New Zealand. So if there was ever a tournament or a Pro Tour out there that I could go to, then she would come with me. And that's something that would be really exciting to me because she's also not a huge travel person, but New Zealand's kind of on her bucket list or place she wants to go to sometime. So I could probably talk her into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, New Zealand would be incredible. And I know that James White says like not likely, but if the game continues to grow like it's growing, I don't see any reason why not. I mean, if you look back in the days of Magic, they used to do like Hawaii Pro Tours, which, is not practical. It's like, it's just not. So like, I don't see any reason why LSS can't do New Zealand. It should have a hometown Pro Tour. That'd be really sweet. But hey, listen, Michael, this has been wonderful. I'm glad that you came on. You've been a great guest, and your insights very valued. And I'm excited for this meta where I'm sure you're going to thrive with your Winter's Whales and your ramparts and stalagmites. But it has been an awesome chatting with you, and I'm sure the buds agree. Could you please, for me, plug anything that you'd like to plug, the podcast, your Twitter, etc.?
You can find me on Twitter. It's at HadesBlade. And then my podcast, the Manor Podcast, I kind of went on a spiel about it earlier in the show. So check it out. Check me and Roger's podcast out, the Manor Podcast.
Yeah, it's great. And I highly recommend it. And, obviously, and if I listen to it, it must be good, right? Those are the rules. But everybody, you can all still find me on Twitter at FreshBedsPod. You can join the Discord, which is the Buds, which is in the link tree below. subscribe, like, comment on the YouTube. If you're listening on audio, if it's like Spotify or Apple, like rate it, leave a review. It really helps. Do it for the M&R podcast as well. Just to, it helps us get seen. I mean, that's what it's all about. And now, Michael, I always like to end the podcast talking a little bit about food. There is so much to talk about food. I think it's the great unifier of all people. Though, I'm a blue cheese fiend, and I know a lot of people, they like this thing called ranch, but we're not going to talk about salad dressings. What is one of your favorite things to eat? Maybe it's local to you, or maybe something that you look forward to. It's like special.
There's so many good answers to this question. There's so many good foods. I think one of my favorite things is curry. It's just like white rice with this really nice sauce with meats and vegetables in it. And some of my close friends made it for me for my birthday a few years ago. And since then I've been like, man, I love curry. It's really good.
I mean, I'm the same way. I mean, I think curry's been brought up on this podcast like at least 20% of the episodes because curry's so good. Whether it's Japanese or like a Thai curry or I mean, I love Indian curry, but that sounds really good. Thank you again, Michael. Everybody, please have a good week.